Hey everybody, good morning from California. It's almost the end of August 2022, and autumn weather could not come too soon for me. It's still pretty toasty out here in the desert, but the nights are elegant, and I hope everything is good where you are. I really appreciate you joining us today for what must be number 26 in this series called The Wisdom of the Soul. Today, I'm going to review, after our opening meditation, where all of this stuff comes from. When we talk about spiritual but not religious, what does that mean? I mean, what are the roots of spiritual but not religious? What existed before there were religions? And that timeline varies. The religions, the Abrahamic religions of the Middle East sort of begin with, arguably Egypt, but most people would say with Moses in the Hebrew Bible, which then became Christianity, and out of that evolved Islam, those three religions. The roots of Asian religion we'll talk about today. But there are oral traditions that predate even written language that we're going to talk about. And then these other mystical traditions. What is mysticism? We're going to talk about that, and I'll just touch lightly. I'm not going to go into depth on anything today, but just touch lightly on all these different schools of philosophy and thought so that you can do your own research. And this might be a class where, if you haven't been taking any notes, this might be a good one just to jot down a few things, like these different schools of thought, so that you could do your own Google research later. And very quickly get up to speed on the thread or the links that run through these various traditions, and the wonder, really, that there is a consensus that arose in these very separate cultures, and they came to some of the same conclusions. And I think it'll put religion in a different context for you as well, but mostly give you lots of choices in what you explore. And how mysticism is different from religion. And with that, let's do our opening meditation. And I think I'll do one a little bit shorter this week. And I think I'll incorporate a little bit of silence. Let me just say that it's probably obvious to most of you, those of you especially who've been there, who've been here on multiple occasions, that a lot of what I call meditation is really instruction. I'm using meditation, deeply relaxed states, to plant ideas and very simple little seeds. And that's a wonderful way to do meditation, but it's not the only kind of meditation. And so today I'm going to do a brief Vipassana exercise for you, the purpose of which is to create an awareness of non-attachment. And what do we mean by non-attachment? Let's touch on that. So get comfortable in your chair, your sofa, your bed, wherever you happen to be, your meditation pillow. And sit upright. And if you'd like to sit back and let the back of the chair or furniture support you, that's fine. But get a sense of yourself being balanced. You don't want to hold yourself in any rigid posture. You want to relax. So sort of like propping up a rag doll. Lift your chin just a little bit. We tend to look down. Lift your chin ever so slightly. Let your shoulders drop, opening up your rib cage, your diaphragm, and feel yourself head over shoulders, over pelvis, and your feet either, you may be sitting cross-legged, otherwise feet flat on the floor. That's fine. But begin by feeling yourself in your body. And welcome in how it feels to be in the present moment. In your body, right here, right now. Think of that visual from past exercises where a glass bowl of muddy water sits on the counter and slowly the sediment begins to settle. And soon the water is clear. It's a wonderful approach to meditation. Just let the noise of the monkey mind begin to settle. Release for a few moments your concerns about your life and the world around you and the way it appears to impact you. Give yourself permission for just the next 10 minutes to let go of all of that. And take 2 or 3 nice, slow, deep breaths to signal the brain that you're safe and it's okay to relax. Pulling in strength and power as you inhale, ideally through the nose. And as you exhale, create and sense a letting go. And breathe beyond where you'd normally stop all the way out, all the way out. And again, do that a couple of more times. Slow it down. And then turn your breathing over to autopilot. Just breathe normally. Allow your body to breathe itself. And scan your body with your awareness, starting at your head or at your feet. Slowly sweep the full length of your body, creating and sensing a letting go feeling, becoming more and more relaxed. Feel the letting go. Feel the letting go. Internally, whisper silently to yourself, I am safe. I can relax. I can be at ease. And find my inner peace. Peace is not a destination. We don't have to get there. Just let go of everything that is not peace and love and joy. And you'll find it waiting for you at the center of your being. Deep peace. Kind of a warmth. A contentment or fulfillment. As if everything's okay. And if it's not, well, let's pretend. What if it were? What if your life was pretty much being handled for you? I mean, what if the game was rigged and you are life itself? How could it not support you? Feel that safe and relaxed. Your eyes are closed. You feel emotionally safe and relaxed. You sit still. And let the petitioning of the mind to pay attention to this thought and resolve this and fix that, you let that just fade away. As you move your awareness to the bottom of your nose, and for the next few minutes, simply watch your body breathing itself, all by itself. This is an in-breath. This is an out-breath. Now the mind is not familiar with this, not yet, for most of you. And so it will tell you that it's bored and it wants to go off and worry about things. Our purpose is not to prevent that from happening, but to be aware of it when it does, as it does. And with a little smile, the most subtle smile, you say to yourself when distracted, of course, it's what the mind does. And let it go. No struggle, no fight, no admonishing yourself or allowing your concentration to be broken. None of that. Just let it go after saying to yourself silently, well, of course. And bring your awareness back to watching your body breathe itself as if nothing were more fascinating. And for a couple of minutes, until you hear my voice again, I mean literally just about 2 minutes, just watch your breath. Be that peaceful that you can watch your body breathing itself. And if you can do that for 2 minutes, you can do it for 10 or 15 minutes and become more and more familiar with the settling down. It'll carry over into your entire day. It will introduce you, mind, body, and soul, to how it feels to be safe. And you will begin to feel connected rather than separated. It's subtle, but it comes upon you that you're part of one great thing, one life, one mind, one heart. As if each of us were a different branch on the same tree, sharing a common ground, rooted in that common ground. Never separate, except in appearance. Never abandoned. Never alone. Never left to your own devices. For although we have free will, we have the wisdom of intuition. Sort of like a search engine in your brain and in your heart. And when you get quiet like this and ask a question of yourself, hold that question gently in the palm of your hands. After a few seconds, you'll hear an answer. An answer that is not reasoned, but which arrives full-blown, which unfolds into your awareness, already considered and thought out. And it carries a visceral feeling in your body of confirmation, realization that this is true. It may be part of a larger puzzle, the enigma of life that you unravel. Like the Gordian knot, it takes a while. But ask in these levels of meditation and contemplation for the light, for the insight. Passively stand open and receptive, and invariably you will be illumined. A little or a lot, it's all good. Comes in its own time. And you're safe. There is no other. There is no separation. Feel that connection, the harmony that connects you to unity. These are feelings, a level of awareness that you can easily and effortlessly bring with you back to the waking state. In the past, I've counted you out 1 to 3. Do that for yourself. In your own time, in your own way. Do that now. Count yourself 1 to 3, 3 being eyes open, wide awake, back in the room. Come on up. And as you open your eyes, wide awake, take a nice, big, slow, deep breath. Cleansing breath. And as you exhale, stretch a little bit. Get back into your body. Feel grounded again. Sometimes we drift off into the clouds. So when you wake up, there's that stretch you do in the morning. Let me thank you again for being here and tell you how much I enjoy doing this class and hearing from you. You can always email me at awmysteryschool@gmail.com. Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, the email address is simply awmysteryschool@gmail.com. I enjoy hearing from you and answering your questions. Not only do I read all the email I get, I answer it when appropriate. Sometimes people just check in and say thanks. I may say thanks back, but if you want to go on for a paragraph or two, I'll respond. Tell me what you like about it. Tell me what is missing, what you'd like to hear more of, and maybe even what you could do without. I wanted to address the needs of as many people as possible. So, again, as I said in the newsletter this week, I want to talk about the roots, the particular philosophies that we call esoteric. I'm sure most of us had at least one class in philosophy in high school or college, and maybe more. And my God, they certainly can be boring classes, can't they? You might wonder, why would anybody want to major in philosophy? What a dry, boring subject or topic. And of course, it's just the opposite. There's just so many bad teachers of philosophy. And I think it's because while a great deal of philosophy addresses spiritual concerns, in other words, the energy that illumines and animates us, they tend to avoid the really good stuff, the really juicy stuff, because they don't want to step on anybody's toes. They don't want to offend anybody who has a strong religious background. And we can see recently the concern of many people to, what shall I say, the unfolding of a new awareness in our society and the way it's expressed in gender education, sex education, which people easily confuse and are very different topics. Human rights, civil rights, so-called critical race theory, which is a grad school thing. It's not happening in our grade schools or high schools. There is no critical race theory, but increasingly we're being told, our children are being told the truth of America's history, which is complex. It's wonderful and horrible all mixed together. And, of course, that makes some people uncomfortable. But being, quote, made uncomfortable can be a good thing. That's called growth, isn't it? So, philosophy is anything but boring. And a lot of it is about, ethics. When you look at Euclid, it's even about geometry. And there is sacred geometry, and it's just a huge, huge field about who we are and why we're here and what we're for and these types of questions. That's what philosophy is. Technically, the word philosophy means a search for truth. And that's what we're looking for. That's how I got to it, was in college. I wanted to know the truth because I felt I was being lied to. I had a lot of FOMO. You know what FOMO is, right? Fear of missing out. I knew something was going on behind the scenes that I wasn't being clued into. So I thought, aha, I'll be a journalist and figure that stuff out. And then I'll blab. I'll I'll get on the radio and I'll tell the truth. I'll be Michael Benner, the hippy-dippy news guy. Al Sleet was the hippy-dippy weatherman, right? I'll be the hippy-dippy news guy that says, hey, here's what's going on. But a few years of that, and I realized, my God, we're not getting to any truth here. I'm just rewriting news releases and talking about government and politics as if our whole lives could be understood through the lens of binary politics. And that seemed ridiculous. So I began to study psychology. Why people do what they do leads pretty quickly to why they feel the way they feel. We're motivated by emotion, energy in motion. The mind is what we think. The emotions are why we think it. And then what motivate to move those thoughts and feelings into a particular action. So the emotion sits right in the center between the thought and its expression through behavior. And did a talk show about that, many of you know, for years and years and years. And I would always use current events as a pretext. You know, this is new in the news. That's why it's called news. And so let's talk about this and that. And people would call and tell me what they thought, just like any other telephone talk show. But then I would say, well, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that's true? But then quickly segue into, why do you feel that way? And if the person got a little irritated, I would often as not call them on that and say, well, you sound a little irritated. Is this frustrating you? Is this difficult for you? Well, when did you first believe this? Why do you believe it? Have you always believed this? Why do you believe this to be true? And the more irritated, frustrated, and even angry that they became, the more I would lean in. Not in a mean or cruel way. The only people I ever really eviscerated on the radio were those who actively promoted violence, war, fear, and hatred. Those people, they got special treatment from me. You know, it was a show after all, and they called me. But you know, that was the exception to the rule. Most of it was, well, gosh, you sound a little frustrated. Like, does this make you angry? And why do you suppose you're angry? And of course, then comes the denial, and they start yelling, "I'm not angry," and screaming and insisting how not angry they were. and yet betrayed by their emotional angst on the radio. And people loved it. People would just move to the edge of their chairs waiting for these emotionally naked people to dance for us. But my whole purpose was to reveal, again, these deeper motives and even identity. And then psychology had its limits, so eventually I stumbled into philosophy. And meditation took me there. The more I meditated, the more my wanderings, my mental wanderings, my heart took me deeper and deeper into philosophy, and particularly the esoteric, which means for the few. Exoteric is that which anybody can understand for the general public, but esoteric is for the most worthy. It's deeply symbolic, it's full of metaphor and allegory, and it gets exciting when the pieces start to fall together, like some sort of Tetris game, or when you get Wordle in 3 or 2. My wife Doreen loves Wordle, and it's a great feeling when you've accomplished something. This aha experience is delicious, isn't it? We just want more ahas in our lives. Like, oh, I get it. Like, ging. Now it's so obvious, or the patterns of your life become so beautiful, and you begin to see the integration, and it's like you're pulling back or zooming out and starting to see the bigger picture and the whole context when you study esoteric philosophy. So what is that? Well, let's do it chronologically, and let's start with the shamans. And I checked it out. The plural of shamans has an S on the end. It's not shaman, M-E-N. It's shamans. And these are the medicine men and medicine women. These are the, I don't like the term, but witch doctors. Witches around Wicca and Wiccan, and even the word wicked shows you the Christian influence of anything that's not ultra-conservative Christianity must be evil, because there's only two things anything can be, is good or evil, and if it's not all good and true, then it must be completely evil. Wicked, Wiccan, Wicca. These are the healers. These are people who used nutrition and herbs and clay and we said herbs that are consumed, herbs that are sometimes just burned, and like saging. I mean, there's so much. It's such a folk medicine would be another way of talking about shamanism. And wherever we look in the world, if we study the truly ancient, like long before Christ, before written language even, these societies were not in touch with each other. They didn't have great sailing ships, and they weren't flying around the world meeting each other. And yet they arrived at some of the same understandings. And when you study shamanism, or even some of the contemporary versions of that, which include the use of psychedelics and mind-expanding drugs like ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, which is a rye ergot or fungus. All of these are naturally occurring chemicals. You have receptor sites in your brain. That's how we found a lot of the neurotransmitters. Was why does LSD have a receptor site in your brain just waiting for the molecule to lock on? And we found these neurotransmitters, the dopamine and the endorphins and the serotonins and This is not my strength, but you know what I'm talking about. So these psychedelic or otherworld experiences often involved the use of drugs and still do. And what the psychedelic seems to do is open the filter that is the brain. The brain is a filter. It allows our awareness to be focused, to be selective. And I could do a whole class on selective awareness. I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but let me just quickly point out how miraculous selective awareness is. You could go into a room that's filled with people, say 150 people in a big room, some sort of event or a mixer, and people are standing around in groups of 2, 3, 4 people chatting, so that there might be, in a room of 150 people, there might be 40 conversations going on. You could stand in the middle of that room or just off to the side by the doorway and without moving, listen to one conversation to the exclusion of all the others. You have that ability. Think about it. And then simply by forming the intention, you can move your awareness around, somewhat like tuning an old radio. You know, turn the dial and go up and down the band. You can do the same thing in this room and then shift your consciousness or your awareness to an entirely different conversation, virtually to the exclusion of all the others. Yeah, sure, there's background noise, the din of all of these conversations happening at once is something you could also be aware of, but we have that ability to tune in to one conversation way over there on the other side of the room, just by forming the intention and maybe looking in that direction. But you can even do it with your eyes closed and just fix on one particular voice and hear that conversation. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. Or listening to music in the same way, whether it's classical music or jazz or rock and roll or pop, folk, country, blues, it doesn't really matter. Most people listen to the lyrics. But if you're a drummer, you probably listen to the drums. You may not even know the lyrics to a whole bunch of really popular tunes that you absolutely love, but you know the drummer, you know the drum part. And the guitar player will probably listen to the guitars and the bass player to the bass. And of course, the songwriter and the singer is going to listen to the lyrics. But again, almost to the exclusion. This is a great meditation. You can do this for yourself. Put the radio on if you still have one, or your MP3 player or whatever. Get your mix list out and begin to listen to some tunes and listen to one 3-minute song focused on just the lyrics. And you'll hear all the other instruments. But then play it a second time and listen just to the bass player. And you'll hear all the other instruments, but you'll hear things that the bass player is doing that you never heard before, even though you know this tune so well. And then you could do the same thing with any other instrument. But what I'm talking about is what this says about our amazing ability to be aware of being aware. See, this is meta-awareness. Not a word you hear people use in conversation very often, but it's noticing what you notice, or to be aware of what you're aware of. Sometimes this is called metacognition, but that's really thinking about thinking. To be aware of your awareness, of your ability, for example, in this case to be selective in your awareness, is to raise your consciousness. That's higher consciousness. It's expanded awareness. I've raised my consciousness or expanded my awareness to the point that I'm aware of being aware. I'm conscious of myself as a conscious, sentient being. And that's very different from normal consciousness. Like watching yourself watch, watching yourself live, watching yourself react and then realize, my God, I never made a decision to do that. That was pretty reflexive. I was pretty much coming out of my animal nature, as evidenced by the defensiveness and the rationalization after the fact. So just a little aside. But that's central to shamanism, and that's where it all began. That's where it begins. And now looking back, we can see this remarkable consensus about the fact that the world is an appearance in form of an energy. Einstein, I've said this before, put the equal sign between energy and the material world. Energy, E equals M, energy equals mass. The material world is made out of spirit or energy. It's invisible. Magnetic fields, like wherever you are right now, you're surrounded by hundreds of radio stations. And Uber drivers and taxi cabs. Are there still taxi cabs? I think so. And, shortwave radio guys and the time signal and Radio Havana and all these radio signals are in the air around you, plus the hundreds of stations right in your own city, but they never get mixed up. They don't distort each other. They remain separate because each has its own frequency. If you begin to look at the objects that you think are so solid as energy or spirit, then you're more interested in the frequency than its appearance of being solid. Shamans worked on that level. They also worked with dreams. They knew the dream world was every bit as real as the waking state, and indeed the waking state was a dream. And if you think about it, the three levels of consciousness, sleep, meditation, or contemplation, that in-between state, and wide awake, you dream in all three. You obviously dream when you're asleep. You can use your imagination in meditation to visualize. That's a dream. So why would you think that when you open your eyes, what you see is not a dream? Oh, because you can touch it. Oh, yeah, because you can touch it. Because it seems to last. Because it's more solid. It doesn't dance around like the dream images in your meditation or in your night sleep. But again, remember what you know from 8th grade science. It's an illusion. It's just energy swirling around. The tiniest particles are not even particles. They're little vortices. I think that's the word, vortices, the plural of vortex. These little tiny micro subatomic tornadoes spinning around. And electrons don't spin around the nucleus in a molecule, have we been told. They actually flash on and off. You never know when it's going to pop up here and then pop up there. And when it's going to jump from one shell to a higher energy shell or give up energy and collapse into a lower energy shell. But they're all flashing on and off. Everything is flashing. You look at a movie, it looks like a streaming action, just like real life. But you know the movie is really 24 still images per second. And those still images move so quickly, 24 frames a second, that it creates an illusion of motion. until you see the wagon wheel go backward and you wonder what the hell is that. Join us for our cinematography class and we'll talk about that. Well, the world is flashing, an incandescent light bulb. AC current alternates 60 times a second. So you turn on an incandescent light bulb, it's flashing off and on and off and on 60 times a second, but you don't see that flashing because of the limitation of our senses. You just see, oh, the light's on. So it is with reality. We see continuity and solidity and unchanging form, even though it's all changing. Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts. The pyramids, pretty old. Some of these other megalithic, monolithic structures around the world, 10,000 years old, 12,000 years old. The only reason they lasted is they're buried in dirt and sand, exposed to the environment, the weather, the rain, the sun. Even the pyramids will in time go away. Everything passes. Nothing lasts. That's how we know it's not true. That's how we know it's not real. What constitutes reality? What conditions do we need to have for reality to be capital R reality? There are three. At its fundamental level, reality must be impermanent. I'm sorry, I said our appearance of reality is that the material world is impermanent because it's made out of energy and it's always in flux. Capital R reality is permanent. That's the first quality. It must be permanent. And the second quality relates to that very directly. It must be unchanging. Reality has to be permanent and unchanging. If it's always in flux, and it's always changing, and everything's in decay, and born and lives and dies, that's an appearance. It's not real. It's got to be, again, who says, right? Who says? This is the consensus of philosophy, esoteric philosophy. The three qualities are, it must then be permanent. Reality would have to be permanent and unchanging. And the third quality, which is really provocative and fun, is it must be self-shining. You might want to write that down. In order for something to be real, in order for it to be true, with a capital T and a capital R, true reality, reality that is true, must have these three qualities: permanence, unchanging or unmoving, and self-shining. And that's the deity, that's the Godhead, that's what people call God, though they personify it as a superhero, a human being on a cloud. And they say, well, I feel that connection in my heart. Well, of course you feel it in your heart, because you're part of this one thing that is permanent and unchanging and self-shining. It creates of itself, it emanates and radiates without being diminished. And probably the best example is the sun. Now, we know that the physical sun, a star, will eventually run out of fuel and implode, supernova, become a black hole or a dwarf star or a red giant, but eventually they collapse on themselves. But it's an allegory, it's a metaphor, so the sun's a pretty good allegory. And why would we be surprised to look back in history and see shamanism evolving into sun worship? And this is the first monism or monotheism the origins of the idea that there's only one God, as opposed, for example, to Hinduism has hundreds of gods, and the Greeks and Romans had their pantheon of gods, all of them representing different qualities. It's not clear how many people in Greece or Rome in the ancient times believed these were literal gods, although there is some research to indicate they may have been. For example, the Roman god Mercury and the Greek god Hermes are basically the same symbol. You may know the logo of the FTD florist. That's Mercury with the little wings on his hat and the wings on his feet, and he carries a caduceus, which is like the rod, the scepter, the magic wand, or the wizard's staff. The caduceus is a bar, it represents the spine. It also represents the connection to your oversoul from the Sushumna. The Sushumna is that connection from the crown to your oversoul. That's what the magic wand and the wizard's staff, the scepter, and kings had scepters. That's what that represents, the power of that alignment, really. And so the original sun worshippers, there's many around the world, and again, all life seems to come from the sun. It's just a pretty good indication that there's only one God. My point in bringing up Hermes and Mercury is that legend tells us there was a real person, maybe a series of teachers or sages, but at least one person in Egypt, thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, named Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. In the Bible, he's referred to as Thoth, T-H-O-T-H. It's hard to say, Thoth, Thoth. And Thoth, or Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, wrote the Emerald Tablet. You say, tablets? Wait a minute, I thought that was Moses. Stone tablets, burning bush, all of that. Yeah, well, 10,000 years before that, there was the Emerald Tablet. And the Romans wrote about it. They saw it. It was in the library at Alexandria for 1,000 years. And, of course, the Romans burned that down on 2 different occasions. They just torched the library at Alexandria about 2,000 years ago, about the time of Christ. We're not going to have any of this pagan stuff, right? Because we know Jupiter and Zeus are the real CEOs on Mount Olympus, right? Well, the Emerald Tablet is part of a whole belief system, this early religion that is ancient Egyptian Hermeticism. Remember Johnny Carson used to do that bit about the answers have been concealed in this, kept safe in this hermetically sealed jar. Right? Hermetically sealed. What is that? Hermetic. That's a reference to ancient Egyptian philosophy or religion. The pharaohs said they were the gods, but they knew there was a life force or an energy. Some suggest the pyramids even are energy generators or energy attractors or somehow align with this great spirit, this energy. And alchemy is much more than turning lead to gold. That even was an allegory for turning a lead into consciousness. Those who suffer from the illusion that physical, dense, material world is only what it appears to be, that there's not an energy behind it that is permanent and unmoving and self-shining. So it's an allegory. Turning lead to gold was uplifting consciousness to an awareness that beyond the veil there's an energy or a spirit or a breath from on high that illumines and animates us. And how do we do that? How do we lift that up? Well, they said by fire. Fire purifies. Purgation, it's called in alchemy. The adversity of life burns off the impurities, and what's left is the gold, and you're a better person. This, of course, leads to the Jewish Bible, because Moses was raised by these guys. Moses was, as a baby found in the reed bed in the basket floating down the river and taken into the homes of ruling class Egyptians, the pharaohs and such. And he knew all this alchemy stuff, and he knew about the Emerald Tablet. So we shouldn't be surprised that he, escaped the slavery that the Egyptians were holding the Jews in slavery, building the pyramids or whatever, just bringing them dinner. And Moses knew all about the power of tablets, and God gave me I'm not discounting the reality of it. I don't know if it's real or not. That's the thing about mythology. Whether it's real or not doesn't really matter. It's the allegory that we care about. What does it represent? What is this law on the Emerald Tablet? What is this law on the stone tablets of Moses? And of course, out of that comes Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth. And Christ is a title, please remember. It's not his last name. Christos is that name for this life force or this energy or this spirit that we keep talking about as illumining and animating these meat bodies that we have. That's the Christos. It's the love in your heart that connects you to all things. So it's a title. Jesus the Christ, or Christ Jesus. It's a title. It's like Mahatma or Maharaj or Shri. And so Christianity comes out of this as a form of Judaism, and about 500 years later, the Quran is revealed to Muhammad, and we get Islam out of that. But they're all Abrahamic religions, these three. They're monotheist. They see God as singular and unified, but separate and living outside its creation, petitionable through prayer. Meanwhile, in the East, we have in prehistoric times the Vedas, which are more cultural than religious. But they're ancient books of gods that walked the earth, much like the Greek and Romans, their pantheon of gods. And were they real? Well, supposedly Krishna was a real guy. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Just like Hermes, was he a real guy? Or Lao Tzu, for that matter, in China. The author of the Tao Te Ching, was he one guy named Lao Tzu? Because Lao Tzu translates the sage. So he may have been Lao Tzu and Hermes and Krishna. These guys may have been part of a whole lineage of individuals. We're not sure. That's how old it is. So in China, we have the about 500 BC, Lao Tzu. That's about the same time as Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, by the way, about 500 years before Christ. And so Lao Tzu in China does pretty much the same thing in assembling all of this folk wisdom, and then Confucius sort of built on that shortly later, not much after Lao Tzu. In fact, some people say that Lao Tzu may have met Confucius. Who knows? And I'm going to have to skate over Pythagoras and the Alexandria schools, the original mystery schools, just given our time here. And I'm going to go a few more minutes and then we'll go to your questions and your comments, so you may want to add those to the chat box. So out of the Vedas, this cultural philosophy of Hindustan, which is what India was called in those days, Hindustan, comes Hinduism, which, like Christianity, you have Catholics and then 1,001 different Protestants and Baptists and Lutherans and Methodists. And that's what Hinduism is. It's like thousands of variations on a theme and all these different gods and goddesses. And then again, about 500 BC. I mean, look at all these guys are living at the same time. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha. All pretty much within a 200-year period, about 5 centuries before Christ. And so Buddhism spins out of Hinduism as Taoism spins out of Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and Confucianism. And Taoism is very much like Buddhism. The principles are very similar. Buddhism and Taoism is not mysticism. In fact, they don't even refer to God. Buddhism, most notably, there's no reference to God at all. There's a Buddha nature. There are supposedly millions of fully realized, enlightened Buddhas in the universe, but they've long transcended their need for a body. And that's about as close as you get to a religion. Buddhism is practiced by many as a religion, but most shrines in the East have everything. They'll put in some Buddha statues and some statues of Krishna and, all manner of religious icon in the same stupa, in the same temple, in the same shrine. Sort of pray to whoever you want. Just, here you go. Here's a place on the road where you can rest and pray and contemplate. Something remarkable happened in the Renaissance then in Europe. 14th, 15th century. The Renaissance, the rebirth, the art, the culture, the artwork, the paintings, the sculptures, the literature, the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, science. Newton, Bacon, these great thinkers and essay writers. Just this explosion coming out of the European Dark Ages. And part of that was a rediscovery of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, and the Zohar. And tarot cards came out of that discovery in the Renaissance era in Europe as a correlation or representation of this Tree of Life. And, of course, Islam has its mystical traditions as well, which is Sufism. And maybe you've seen the whirling dervishes spinning and this beautiful, elegant dance that they do to create an altered state. And if you look carefully, the beginning of the dance, the finger is pointing up, and the palm is open and receptive. And as the dance continues, the dervish turns his hand downward as if bringing the spirit down to an embodiment of our divine nature as they spin and spin. And you remember as kids how fun it is to spin, but we usually get dizzy and fall down. The Sufi learns how to transmute that or transform that into higher consciousness. And so we have Jewish mysticism and Islam mysticism, the Sufis. And what about Christian mysticism? Well, those are the Rosicrucians. And this is a group of enlightened scholars, this is really my wife's purview. She's really much more knowledgeable than me about this stuff. But Francis Bacon and a group of like Sir Walter Raleigh and others in this period are really largely responsible. Many people believe Bacon wrote the original Rosicrucian documents, the Fama, the Confessio, and the Canonical Wedding, nailed them to the church door as Martin Luther later did when he and his group of Protestants, or Protestants as they're called, broke away from the Catholic Church, which put all of this Christianity together 300 years after Christ. The mystical tradition of Christianity, Rosicrucianism, has always been veiled because of the inquisitors. And they were killed and tortured and excommunicated. And remember, the church is the government, so you don't mess with it. A lot of the disruption you see in society today is an effort by very ultra-conservative Christians to replace democracy with a theocracy. And we see a lot of that in the Middle East. That's what the jihad is all about, with the super conservative Muslims who, again, think they're Sufi mystics, though they read the same Quran, are blasphemers and should be killed. So there's sort of some of that contempt between far-right religious conservatives, whatever their religion, and those mystics who say, let me create my own relationship through love. Love is the connection, and I'll use that. I will surf that love to a better understanding of the divine. And I'll read your books, I'll read your scriptures, I'll read your gospels, I'll learn from them, I'll study the words of your prophets. But I'll make up my own mind, thank you. You know, I can do without the fellowship. I'd rather be alone in meditation, frankly. Oh, there's so much to be said here, but Rosicrucians today is pretty much a loosely knit, hardly even connected. There really is no leadership, but it appears as Freemasonry. Just don't expect Masons to know much more than the ritual and the ceremony. Some of them are esoterically involved and know the meaning, but most Masons don't. It's just a social club. And there's no conspiracy, and they're not the Illuminati. It's just a bunch of good guys that get together, and they believe that the universe ultimately is one thing. So they have an eyeball up in the top of the ceiling, and this country was founded by Masons, so you see the eyeball over the pyramid on the back of your dollar bill. That's the all-seeing eye. That's God. And the G you see in Masonic literature stands for God, but also for geometry. And they trace their lineage all the way back to the Hermeticists, to the Temple of Solomon. And this is also rich and wonderful. You see how exciting this is? And again, what's the thread? What unites all of this stuff? And I think I've pretty much touched on it here. From the shamans to the sun worshippers to the Egyptian Hermeticists, the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Vedas, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shintoism, Jainism, the Sikhs. You haven't even gotten to the Sikhs yet, but they're all different flavors. It's like the Baskin-Robbins of philosophy. There's so much here. Why would you pick one and not study the others? Why would you not want to embrace all religious traditions and the overarching philosophy behind the belief system and the ritual and the ceremony that's acted out? Because most people just don't have the time. They're not inclined to immerse themselves in... Most religious people don't even read their own religious book. I mean, that's one of the main reasons the Protestants broke away from the Catholic Church was no Bible reading. The Catholics didn't want you reading the Bible and coming to your own understanding of what it means. So I was raised Catholic. The Mass was in Latin. I couldn't even understand. I took 2 years of Latin in high school, hoping I could figure out what they were saying. Didn't do me any good at all. But they never read from the Bible. The books we had in church were called missals, and they were written by the church and made veiled references at times to what Christ may have said, but these were not Bible studies, not the Catholic Church. Now that's changing. It's rapidly changing because the churches, Catholic, Protestant, and others, are emptying. And we're now at a point where about 40% of Americans, I haven't seen the stats elsewhere, but in America, about 40% of American adults now describe themselves as you probably do, spiritual but not religious. I feel the connection. I feel the longing in my heart. I really would like to love my neighbor, especially if he would get rid of that arsenal of weapons that he has, and more importantly, all the fear that drives it, and replace that fear with love and harmony and peace, and wisdom. So that's an overview. That's a big picture of esoteric philosophy and trumpet fanfare, drum roll, perennialism. This is what perennial philosophy refers to. It's also called Prisca Theologia. That's the Latin for the prime or the first theology, the first religion. Prisca Theologia, generally referred to as perennial philosophy or perennialism. Great book by Aldous Huxley called The Perennial Philosophy. You can read that book in a few days if you want. And here we call it the ancient wisdom or the ageless wisdom. So what I've been doing with podcasts and radio and now with this Zoom class is all of this, embracing all of it. Pick and choose, embrace, love it all. You don't have to choose between vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. You can have all three. You know what I'm saying? Why would you choose one and be completely ignorant of the others? And who is the loudest and the angriest when they object to the fact that you don't conform perfectly to their view of religion? It's the ones, generally speaking, who know the least about the other religions, who've never read those books. The Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, I can't even say it, Mahabharata. I think I'm mispronouncing that. And these books of the Vedas, Patanjali and yoga. I haven't talked about yoga. That predates Hinduism, so-called. And what's Hinduism? It's like Protestantism. It's 1,000 different religions named for the area of the world called Hindustan. It didn't become India till England occupied it. And you know about Columbus looking for the Indians. That's Hindustan. So, Mindy, let's go to the questions and see if anybody has any comments or inquiry about what we've talked about here today.
Yes, send your comments and questions to me at the chat. I think it might be pronounced Mahabharata. I was actually listening to a University of Birmingham, England history professor gave an hour talk to a class on the ancient Greek mysticism and history, and it was fascinating. He was so enthusiastic, but Maha meaning great, and there are so many texts in it that he said he never met anyone who had read the whole thing. But that I really liked how you have coalesced all this, and I've just started to look into the congruity of all of it. It's and like Joseph Campbell, one thought I was right at the end. Joseph Campbell talked about how in Catholicism, when the priest had his back to the parishioners and the mass was in Latin, he said it facilitated trance type meditative thought, which I found fascinating to, in the incense, to just take us out of the common realm. And although I certainly never thought that when I was listening to the mass in Latin, but there was something about that sing song quality that was a little bit transformative. I noticed even as a child.
Well, the old Gregorian chants were certainly intended to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably every Catholic parish handled music differently, but a lot of the choir singing, there wasn't Gregorian chanting going on in the church. There were typical hymns and choir songs in Catholic churches and Protestant churches, and the Black Christian church in America is very centered around music and celebrating and, the good news of... You see, one thread that exists in all these traditions is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the first noble truth in Buddhism, life is suffering, you shall know suffering, or Christ on the cross, or in Hermeticism, Horus was treated badly and crucified as well. So how do you escape suffering? And so the church interjects itself and says, well, there's paradise here. And if you keep coming to me, to my church, in fact, if you put a little money in the basket, we all appreciate that. But then that got crazy. The idea of we need a new roof for the church became, I need a second private jet and a Rolls Royce, and these televangelists and their prosperity gospel is embarrassingly perverse. I check these guys out on TV every once in a while because I'm just amazed at how they can conflate the grace of the divine with the need for money. It's and how God will bless you with money, but only if you prime the pump by giving money to the poor? No, to the rich. Joel Osteen lives in a $25 million mansion and charges admission to get into his church, which used to be a basketball arena. And it's a lot of it's this new age prosperity, law of attraction, and the secret stuff. And these fundamentalists said, that's a pretty good deal. I think we're going to work that into something called the prosperity gospel. This is largely new in Christianity, and it's a little upsetting. But traditionally, I think you're right. I think the idea of church was to create an altered state. That certainly is what prayer is, and contemplation. But the basic difference between church and mysticism is, are you overshadowed by the church? Does the church stand between you and the ultimate source or creator? Or is it your own oversoul that stands between you and the source? Like the Christ between the mother and the father aspect, between Holy Spirit and Father aspect. The Christ, remember he said, no one comes to the Father but through me. Well, the church wants to take that place of Christ. What Christ is saying is, you don't go to the will of the Father, but through the love of the Son, of the offspring, the intersection of spirit and matter, of heaven and earth, of God and man, of energy and matter. So I would argue that the church is replacing the soul. It's soul robbing in some senses, whereas the mystic says, I don't believe my soul indwells only. I think it overshadows me. I believe that I am an emanation of that soul, which shares the ground of the Most High. This is the Trinity where we started months ago. And so the mystic uses his or her heart to approach the source and better know it, rather than the church. And I think that's a understanding worth pondering. What does it mean to be a mystic? It's a solo endeavor. It's really a very personal approach to the ultimate understanding of who you are, what you're for, and how to be of service to the one life. I mean, why would the one create the many except to know its many diverse qualities? And then to recognize our commonality, that we're one family. Not just humanity, one family, but all of our animal friends and all the plants are expressions of the divine. How could they be otherwise? How could there be anything here that is not from the same source? And we're, even on a physical level, made out of the same star stuff. There's basically hydrogen, and then helium was born out of that. And all the other elements come out of exploded stars, the incredible pressure inside the middle of a star that then explodes, and here we get lead and magnesium and manganese and silver and gold and all the elements, the many elements, the gases and the metals, and all of that is born in a star. And no wonder people worship the sun. You see, it's a beautiful allegory. But there's an energy behind all of that, an invisible, unseen energy that we feel in our hearts. So the mystic says, well, church is fine. That's grade school. I love you for caring. Enjoy yourself. Peace. But I'm gonna walk my own road and read as much literature as I can and talk to as many people and share and do group meditation and come to classes and check out other teachers and just don't join anything. And I'm not going to label myself, though arguably I just have. I'm a mystic. But language, whether it's a label or we need words, if not labels, to communicate. So anyway, that's probably the best way that I can think of to differentiate between religion and spiritual but not religious is really a way of saying I'm a mystic. I'm having my own experience, my own magical, wondrous experience of standing open and receptive to that which overshadows, and then emanating that love, that kindness, that wisdom, that service to others. How can I help? Is there anything I can do for you? Any way I can help you with that? Who we are and what we're for. To know ourselves, to grow ourselves, and express ourselves with loving kindness and service to others. The purpose of life is universal. To grow, to evolve. The meaning is personal, how we do that, how we go about doing that. I do it as a journalist, a talk show host, a meditation teacher, Somebody else is a plumber, a butcher, a baker, a IT person, code writer, bus driver, or whatever, in service to others. It's how the whole economy works. How can I help you? How can we all win? How can we meet these mutual benefits rather than, the only problem is the either or, the idea that in order for me to succeed, somebody's got to fail. I have to use other people's money.
Michael, I wondered if you could seg into a thought I had while you were talking about the metaphor, the allegory that is underneath the Bible. Some people don't agree with this. They're literalists. However, there are a lot of people who in history and now who look at the Bible and the figure of Christ, whether he actually lived or whether he was his figure was a combination of past beliefs come forward, teachings and beliefs come forward. That's a whole nother discussion. But it just struck me while you were talking that in fact, some will need the language and the structure of the religion. There are deep mystics, as we know, in each religion. Thomas Merton comes to mind, that were deeply mystical, and yet there has to be this human element in church, which I think tends to be the corrupting elements with the structure and the power and the money. And that we see that in pretty much the history of all religions. And yet looking back, there's that commonality of the Savior, God, who suffered and died for us and then was reborn, and that goes way back. So it just seems like, as my mom used to say, there's nothing new under the sun. I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think both things are true. It's exceedingly likely there was a historical Jesus of Nazareth, and that these stories are grounded in history. But what you're talking about at the same time, the fact that Christ never wrote anything down, it was 100 years later that the oral traditions of this guy Jesus started to be assembled. So that many of these monks would draw upon the oral traditions of those that came before, with these stories of redemption and resurrection and crucifixion and transmuting or transforming suffering into joy and bliss and ecstasy, going from hell to heaven. This whole journey, that we would see these common elements in all these religions. I think both things are true. I think there really was a Buddha. There have been prophets, Mohammed and Krishna and Hermes and untold shamans, women and men, throughout history that have had these revelations and devoted themselves to the insight and understanding that explodes when you turn within, look within. It just doesn't occur to us. Our eyes look out, our ears and all of our senses are devoted to interpreting the physical world, but that's just a reflection of our consciousness. To turn within and study that interior landscape is something we can do for ourselves. And then we may be stimulated by what the mystics and the prophets of the great religions have had to say, but and informed by that. But nevertheless, each of us has a responsibility to, it would seem to me, to arrive at our own understanding of, well, real or not. Does it matter whether Christ actually walked on water or it's just a story? Because there are stories of Buddha walking on water 500 years earlier. And what does that mean? Well, water is your emotional nature. So could walking on water be your emotions supporting you? And while he was walking on water, what was he saying to the apostles? Don't be afraid. He's saying, chill out. It's just a storm on the horizon, and yeah, the seas will swell up a little bit, but you're in a boat. You're good. What are you so worried about? You guys are always freaked out about something. And here, you can do this. Peter, come on. You can walk on water. And Peter took a step or two, and then he began to think. And plunk, he went in the drink. There's a story in my book about, and I'll leave it at this. This might be, it's unfortunate. We didn't have any questions today. Mindy?
No questions.
Okay. I'm sorry. I would think there would be. Maybe our conversations will stimulate others to jump in. Don't be bashful. Don't be shy. Step right up.
That's right.
I'll leave you with this little story. I think it's a good one about overthinking. We all know about overthinking, especially those of us who do too much thinking. The story is about a ladybug that approaches a millipede and says to the millipede, what a wonder that you have all these legs, hundreds of legs, and I watch you when you walk, and the rhythm of all of these legs that move you forward. I just wonder how you do that. How do you coordinate walking with hundreds of legs? And the millipede paused and thought about it and never walked again. So many things in life that we attempt to do, we prevent ourselves from doing well because we think about it rather than just feel it and do it and go for it. And I think really good athletes can tell you about that same thing. You know, if you want to do, I don't know, let's take gymnastics, for example, or pole vaulting. I mean, can you imagine the first time you jump up onto a balance beam, and how many times you're going to fall off the damn balance beam, and how long it takes, how much practice it takes to relax to the point that you're letting go of thinking about what you're doing, and only then can you balance and perform because you're not thinking about it. And it helps to think positively, you know, which is better than thinking negatively. Gee, I hope I don't fall. It's likely to cause you to fall. To see yourself walking, that's better than thinking negatively. But there's a point in all endeavors where you just turn it over and allow yourself to perform, allow yourself to be. And that means to trust yourself, and that means to trust life. To look for the freshness in every new moment and trust that you are not separate from anything. Life will always support you because you are life. It's like a fish wondering if it's going to be wet at its destination. Maybe I should bring some water with me. No, everywhere the fish goes will be wet. And everywhere we go, and everything that we do, we are supported by a life that is love, that is awareness, that is consciousness. Relax, settle back into it. There's a time for thinking. There's a time for choosing. There's a time for deciding. A time for taking action and stepping forward. But you're always supported by something much greater, something so vast and so wonderful that it's ineffable, and we are that. Here we are searching for love when love is what we are. Let's just see the madness and the irony of it. And it's coming with women and men like those of you in this class, and all around the world, millions and millions of people who are evolving to a whole new level of humanity, some call the kingdom of conscious souls. You know, there have been 8 different species of humans that have become extinct before this race of Homo sapien. And each evolved a little more and a little more, and the next stage of evolution is the human being that knows he's a spiritual being in a body, rather than an animal being wishing, hoping, and praying that it will find a paradise after we die. Why not embody it now? Why not live it now in the way you treat other people, in the way you drive on the freeway, in the way you just let go of your concerns, that you have to micromanage everything? You know, this is hitting each and every one of you differently. That's as it should be. Take from it what you can. Mindy, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
Appreciate your help and conversation, and together we will encourage others to participate in the future. Um, I'm not going to give up on this Q&A thing because I know there will be a time when people will feel free to jump in. And
I have something to say.
oh, good. Thank you, Dora. What's that?
I'm in awe. That's why I don't have any questions. I'm still fascinated by the whole presentation today, that I'm going to look into some of the teachings, but it was fascinating.
What struck you?
That's what
What stands above the rest? Is there one thing that you really got off on?
I just like the intersection of all the religions and the teachings that we don't know about that may have intersected with each other.
Yeah.
And I used to when I was a child, I was raised Catholic too, and I used to tell my mother, how do we know this is the correct religion? As a child, I would go listen to other people speak. They would invite me and I would go listen to the Jehovah Witnesses or whatever. And then I would determine by myself as a child that I did not want to pursue that. But I would go to all kinds of different denominations. I'd ask my mom, can I go? She says, go ahead. And I would grasp a little of each one. And Michael, I just want to say one thing to you. My whole journey in meditation started after listening to your show on KLOS like 25, 30 years ago.
Or 40 even.
Yes, I was a teenager. You're right. I was a teenager. And I would listen couldn't wait to listen to the people that would call in. And yes, and I even went to the Live and Learn Center a couple of times.
Oh, wonderful. What great memories.
Yes.
I'll tell Stephen that. Steve and I, of course, are still very much in touch.
Snyder? Is that his last name?
Yeah, Steve Snyder.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Dora, thank you for that.
What happened.
He's living with his wife and 2 dogs and 2 cats on Maui.
Oh, okay. So
very happy.
Yes, because the Live and Learn Center not disintegrated, but separated. And I always wonder what had happened to the people there.
Yeah, like all things, it dissolved and went its way. And Steve went on to be a CEO trainer, which he still does. He's been doing it for 35 years. He speaks exclusively to groups of CEOs through an organization called Vistage.
Wow.
And it's like a support group or a networking group for the heads of corporations, and they help each other. And they pay a lot of money for it. It's like over $2,000 a month.
Wow.
So it's only for the corporations that, nobody's going to pay that out of their own personal pocket. So
yeah,
he loves doing that. And a lot of the teachings you'd probably recognize as Steve's from way back in the day.
Yeah. You guys were at the forefront of all this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to wrap this up, but
okay. Hey, I finally figured out how to unmute myself.
Oh, good. We'll go along.
All right, Michael, it's Jim. And I also finally figured out how to use my Zoom after a year. Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, well, you can't see me. You can hear me.
But, I can see you.
You can? All right.
Yeah.
All right. True reality, permanent, unchanging. Those aren't those the same things? And where did you get that definition from?
Ramana Maharshi.
Who? What? When?
Oh, you got to know about Ramana Maharshi.
Okay.
I know of your interest in Eastern philosophy and Buddhism in particular, but Ramana Maharshi was, according to many people, a prophet in and of himself, who drew upon the wisdom of all of the Eastern traditions. Google him or YouTube him. There are some full-length documentaries about Ramana Maharshi. He was a pretty remarkable guy, and
how do you spell it?
Just a great mystic. Ramana is Ramana, Ramana.
Okay.
And Maharshi, Maharsha, Maharshi.
That's probably getting close enough right there.
Doesn't the C, Maharshi wouldn't end with an A. Yeah, no. That is close enough. Google will know what you're trying to get at.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But it's not at odds with other definitions from ancient Eastern philosophies. I don't know of a Western philosophy that speaks at such a prime level to reality being unchanging, immovable, permanent, and I love the self-shining part.
Michael, Patrick had a comment. Would you like him to wait on that?
Yeah, hold on just one sec when we finish up with Jimmy. I don't mind if we go a little long today. And Jim's a friend of mine for 100 years, Jim?
100 years, yes.
100 years. And I just wanted to say aloha, bra, and my love and aloha to your beautiful wife, Colleen.
I'll tell her.
And I'm glad you finally figured out how to join us here on Sunday.
It's been a year trying.
Good. Well, see, persevere. So aloha, bro.
Yeah, aloha.
Patrick, what's up, bro?
Yeah, there was a lot of in awe about what you were talking about. But then you brought up what stood out. With the religions, if you're born in this country and people are telling you, this is how it is. And in my case, it's the Christian religion. And if you have any questions about it or how and why we got here, that's almost blasphemous. And you could be condemned or just dismissed outright. Like, when you get older, you'll understand. But when that doesn't come and you wonder, again, like I realized at an early age that Jesus was brought up in only the Jewish religion. And then you touched on it today that Moses was brought up with the Pharaoh and the different gods they were doing. And everything came after them was new. So, I mean, it's how and why are we evolved to this is amazing. So, don't ever quit the question and answer. That's sometimes it's just bubbling inside to get out,
Good. I'm happy to hear that. We have run a little long, which I don't mind, but just for the sake of convention, I'm going to wrap it up. And thanks for your comments and your questions. Melinda, thank you as always for co-hosting. And, I'm on permanent vacation, so it's not like I have to take a week off like Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel or anything. I'm going to be here every Sunday. I really look forward to it and enjoy it. And we post all these on YouTube. Search for Ageless Wisdom Mystery School on YouTube or in Google. We podcast an edited version of this. The podcast also is Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. Leave us a review for the podcast, if you would, at either Apple or Podchaser. They do reviews. That helps a lot. Review my book on Amazon, if you would, or on Goodreads. Can't tell you how important that is. Fearless Intelligence is the book. After you've got a feel for it, I'd really appreciate that. And there's free sessions for individuals if you ever want to talk about private work. Just go to michaelbenner.com. I need to do a better job of promoting myself. This class, like the podcast, is free. The newsletter is free. michaelbenner.com. Every Sunday, 11 a.m. California time. Thank you so much. I feel like adding my signature today. Be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. If you would unmute and say goodbye, aloha, namaste, salam, I'd appreciate it. Have a great week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Aloha, guys.
See you next
Goodbye,
week.
and thank you.
Michael.
See you,
Thank you,
Michael.
Michael.
Bye-bye.